Today, we are going to talk about that smaller portion of creation, but indeed, I would say the most valued and most important of all the created beings and things that God has made for all of us. And I have entitled this conversation, The Sanctity of Life. It is a conversation that will revolve around Psalm 139, which is a Psalm of David. When God created everything, He markedly noticed that man and life was created differently. The writer showed us how God was able to create everything, from giving us light, the skies and the oceans, land and plants, the sun, moon, and stars, which lighted the whole universe at that time, the fish and the birds, and all the animals. And every time He would create, after commanding, "Let there be light," and there was light, after each command that came into being, we will be able to read that God appreciated what the creation was. And in every stage, in every day of creation, God said of His creation, it was good. "Let there be light," and there was light, and it was so. And God said, it is good. And on the sixth day, as if God was showing, let there be light, it was good. Let there be skies and the oceans, it was good. And God reserved the best for last. Why did I say that? Because on the sixth day, aside from creating the animals, this is what it said. So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. And after creating man and seeing everything that He has created, did He still say, it is good? No. He was more than pleased with what He created. And therefore He said, it was very good. Man, upon his creation, was not a mere good creation. It was a very good creation, to the point that it was a magnificent creation. Why? After all, we are the only ones created in the image of God. Can you all look at me and listen to my instructions? We will now allow you to bring out your mobile phones. Take it out of your bags or your pockets. Do it now without using your thumbs. By the mere murmurs and little whispers that I can hear from where I am, I can imagine and I know how difficult it is, right? It used to be that our thumbs were used only for putting your thumbs up, meaning it's okay, right? Or making your thumbprints. Tama? But now, do you know that the thumb sets us apart from all created animals? Because we are the only ones with a thumb that is facing each other. All thumbs that you can face each other. And today, the thumb is one of our most used fingers in our hands with the advent of the mobile phone. Because today, we don't use our pointing fingers or our other fingers to type our messages. The thumb is now the most important part of our body as far as communication is concerned, because that's what we use to text. Yeah, Pastor Mike is showing us if we want to text using our other fingers. This is how it's going to look like. Did you know that aside from the thumb, the whole body that we have is such a magnificent piece of machine, if we can say that word, piece of machine, that all of us will just be able to stand amazed and awed by the creation of how the body is. Do you know that the heart is a muscle? Para yung biceps, triceps, at kung ano pang seps. It is a muscle that acts like a pump, because it pumps in and out the blood in and out of the heart and the other parts of our body. And it will beat 3 billion times on the average in your lifetime. Pag madalas ka ma-in-love, mas mabilis yon. The lungs. Can we all take a deep breath? Inhale. Exhale. What you just did was fill in with air about 600 million air sacs in your lungs. And do you know that if we spread out all of those teeny-weeny air sacs, it will fill the whole tennis court? Add to that the capillaries, which are the small blood vessels inside our lungs, are so fine and so small that the red blood cells will need to have a single line, a single queue, to be able to pass through it. I can go on and simply rattle off every little part, big or small part of our body. And we will all simply agree that all of us will just stand amazed and in awe of how this body of ours was created and made. And in Psalm 139, David was able to say that. He was able to say and spell it out very beautifully for all of us, saying that when we care about our life, we realize its value. The more valuable we see something is, the more care we give to it, right? If you have a $10 pair of shoes, kahit umulan, bumagyo, bumaha, tatampisaw mo lang yan, correct? But if you're wearing your Prada, your Bali, your Louis Vuitton, what will you do when there's a puddle of water? You remove your shoes and walk on your bare feet. Because that's how valuable it is. And the same goes when David realized how valuable man is, how valuable in terms of creation, how man was created. He therefore was able to say, we care about life when we realize its value. The sanctity of life, the sacredness of life, how we view life and our own or others is dependent on whether we realize how valuable that life is. Because man's value is based on the God standard. If there is one thing that all of us should be able to conclude at the end of this conversation, it should be this, that my value is to be measured nowhere else but by God's standard. It is the God standard that will be able to make me realize how valuable I am and how valuable others are for that matter. So David, when he wrote Psalm 139, in the beginning of the chapter, we will converse about starting with verse 13. But starting from verse 1 to 12, it speaks about who God is. It says that God is omniscient. That means God knows everything. He says that God is omnipresent. That means He is present everywhere all the time. He also says that God is omnipotent. That means He is powerful. He is super powerful, as a matter of fact. Realizing all of this, David then was able to give a song of worship to God, realizing that God, you know everything. Even those little secrets that I cannot tell mom or dad, God knows. So there's really nothing that you can hide from Him. He's omnipresent. He's everywhere, all the time. Not only sometimes. That's why the song, God is watching me from a distance, is not true. Because God is never distant. He is all about you. He is always with you because God is omnipresent. Add to that, God is very powerful. That He is in control of everything and anything that happens to us. Realizing all of this, David now starts to say, for you created my inmost being. David was able to realize that God's creation reveals His majesty not only in the physical world, but also in the silent darkness of the womb. That is why He was able to say, "For you created my inmost being." Do you know that that word create to the Hebrew is such a rich word? The word create means kana. It means to get, to acquire, to create, to buy, or to possess. If you read the different translations of the Bible, you will alternatively read, "For God created," "For God possessed," "For God is the creator," "For God is the possessor of the world and everything in it." That means that this word can alternately mean to say, I get, I acquire, I create, I buy, or possess. When you buy something, the ownership is now changed, correct? If I go to the department store and buy a dress, as soon as I pay for that dress does not belong to the department store anymore, right? It now belongs to me because I bought it. That is the same thing that David was saying here. When God created my inmost being, who is the possessor of my inmost being? It's God, the creator, the one who purchased, the one who acquired, the one who possesses is God. The ownership does not belong to man, but it belongs to God. When David was saying this, all the Hebrew people, all the Jews understood what he was saying. But to the Christian believer, even until now, we know that this has even two meanings for us. Because God did not only create us, but we all know that God bought us for a price. So there is now double ownership as far as we are concerned. God did not only create me, but He also bought me through the precious blood of Jesus. Ang galing, diba? David was establishing the ownership of man. Man does not belong to man. So when we read this verse, when we read this psalm, it is difficult. During that time, I'm sure David never even imagined that abortion was going to be real. But in today's context, it is difficult not to talk about it simply because the issue of abortion in today, the issue of legal abortion, is brought about by the fact that ownership is given to the mother instead of God. That the baby inside the womb belongs to the mom. Kaya kahit na anong gusto kong gawin dun sa nasa tiyan ko, akin yan eh. That's mine. That's why in the momentous decision of Roe versus Wade in the 1970s, that was the contention why that case won. It was because they were saying that it was the right of a woman to determine whether they would keep the baby or not. But I am sure that during David's time, that was far-fetched. It was not an issue then. Because ownership was then determined and decided that ownership of a child, of a man, of a human being, is God's. That's why David was openly able to say, "For you created my inmost being." You created me, you bought me, you kana me, so that means I am owned by you. That is what David is saying. So this is the establishment of ownership that can be accorded to God alone, Him being the creator. And then David continues on and says, "For you created my inmost being." Do you know what the inmost being that they're saying here? Literally translated, it means the kidneys. Because during that time, when they slaughtered an animal, the kidney was the farthest organ that they will be able to get and remove. That's why they were saying, "My inmost being." Yes, God indeed created our kidneys. But now, alternatively, through time, we have changed that. Our inmost being is now more positioned to be our heart. That is our inmost being. Kaya when we declare our love, when we profess our love to someone, we say, I love you with all of my heart, with all of my being, with everything that I have. So if you live during David's time, you will say, I love you with both of my kidneys. Diba? Because that is what the inmost being is being mentioned. But is that what it means? When you say, I love you with all of my heart, does that mean I love you with my atria and ventricles and my veins and the capillaries inside and even all the blood inside? Is it the physical heart that we're saying? Hindi, di ba? When we say, I love you with all of my heart, that means I love you with everything that I am. I love you with all of my innermost being. That means David was saying that it is not only the physical that God made, but even the internal. Everything that is inside, my personality, who I am, my thoughts, my being. That is who I am, and that is what you created me to be. So that is what David is saying here. You created my inmost being. And then he goes on to say, you knit me together in my mother's womb. Who among you are into knitting? Knitting. Knit. Knit. K-N-I-T. Ano sabi ko? I used to think that knitting was for lolas. Di ba? That's how I imagine it to be na when I'm a lola, old and gray, I will just sit down on my tumba-tumba, on my rocking chair, and do my knitting with my knitting needles and all. But do you know that it's not very easy to knit? Sabi ko nga, hindi na pala pwede because our eyes are failing us. So you can't really see all of those little things. But when you start knitting, you picture the tapestry that you will make. And when you have a clear picture of what it is that you want to make, then you go to the store, shop for your yarn in all the colors that you want your tapestry to have. So you get the blues, how many whites, how many reds, how many orange, how many yellow. And it's not easy to do. And that is what David is saying here. He's saying that you knit me together in my mother's womb. David is saying that you are carefully made. You are well thought of. You are not, hindi ho sinasadya, nangyari na lang. No. When God created, you were well thought of. You were well planned. God had a whole plan of how you're going to look like, how you're going to stand, how you're going to sit, how long your hair will be, how many strands of hair do you have. God carefully planned every one of us. And where was all of these things happening? He said, you knit me together in my mother's womb. Pretty much like a painting, like a tapestry. Every time we see a painting, when we're in the museum or elsewhere, like in the home of someone, and we see various paintings, what do? We take a look, diba? We usually look at the bottom. Art curators say that they do not only look at the bottom for the signature of the painting, but they also have to look at how it is presented, even the back portion. Each artist will have a different way of labeling or stamping their creation. Art, they say, is valued depending on the inspiration of the artist and how much perspiration was put on it. And when we see the paintings of, say, Leonardo da Vinci, of Picasso, when we see the paintings of the artwork of Michelangelo, of David, and when we marvel at them and see how precious and beautifully done they are, we will all be able to see that there is no greater artist than God. Because God, the greatest artist, created a masterpiece of great value. And that masterpiece is you and me. That is what David is saying. You knit me together in my mother's womb. You planned me. You created me. And every artist, every artwork reveals who the artist is. And in each one of us, God is revealed in each one of our lives. Do you know that God has a stamp of ownership on us? On each one of us, each artist will have their signature on their artwork, and God has penned a signature on each one of you. Each one of us has a unique thumbprint. No one is the same. Kahit po tingnan nyo magkapatid, even twins, every curve, every crease, every depth of that thumbprint is going to be different. That is the indelible mark that God has imprinted on each one of us, signifying that He owns us. And do you know that each one of you, each one of us, has a different DNA makeup? No one is the same. That is how unique God has made each one of us to be. When David said, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Okay, look at your seatmate and tell them, you are fearfully made. Hindi po nakakatakot. Kayo naman eh. Because the word fear here does not mean you get scared. The word fearfully means, it is like when God says that we should approach God with fear. It is not because we're scared of Him. It just says that we give reverence and awe. And as I mentioned earlier, every time we think of man as God's creation, we should give the same reverence and awe and respect to that creation. Because we have been fearfully made. Due the wonder, reverence, and awe. Because human life is sacred. It is important. It is vital. It is of great value. And if we can only live that way, that each human being is of great value, I think we would treat each other differently. If we can only put in our minds that God has indeed made each one of us, giving us that indelible imprint that we are His, we will treat each other differently. And David goes on. He doesn't only say that we are fearfully made, but he says we are wonderfully made. Do you know what the word wonderful means? It says you are created with a sense of distinction. We are set apart. We are distinct, different from the others. We are not like any other plant. We are not like any other animal. So please, mga kapatid, stop acting like one. Because we are not animals. It is just sad that now man has reduced themselves to being just one of the species of animals. But I think you and I will all agree that we are not animals. That is why David was able to acknowledge that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I am a wonderful creation of God, distinct and set apart. Because every man is uniquely created by God with a stamp of ownership. Being fearfully and wonderfully made makes us a valuable creation of God. I'm not saying that the animals are not important. I'm not saying that our cats and dogs are not of value, but they can never be of the same value as human beings, as men. will be, because that's simply how God created us to be. We are set apart. And David continues. He says, my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. David is now talking about the formation of the baby inside the womb. The secret place is like the secret lab of God. That is where every part is being sewn into, woven beautifully and delicately. But do you know that the womb is supposed to be a place of nurture and protection for a developing child? That is the design of the womb. But today, the womb is one of the most dangerous places to be in. Since the legalization of abortion in the US in the 1970s, 55 million babies have been aborted. Even more than the Holocaust and Stalin's takeover put together. That was the momentous event that changed history, because it used to be generations ago, when we would see a pregnant woman, we would say, oh, how's your baby? How's your child? But since the turn of the century, since the 1970s, that baby, that child inside the womb, has been reduced to be a fetus, an embryo, or a tissue that can be discarded and removed. Today, the child inside the mother's womb is reduced to an it instead of a he or a she. That once designed by God to be the secret place of nurture and protection, the hiding place of the human being being developed, has now been reduced to be the most dangerous place in the world. Do you know that the infant inside the womb at 18 days old has a heartbeat? At 6 weeks, brain waves are measured. At 8 weeks, the stomach, the liver, the kidneys are functioning. And the fingerprint is now present. At 9 weeks, the child can feel pain. How in the world can we reduce that beautiful creation into an it? Roe versus Wade won simply because they did that, because it was sheer unimaginable to say that we are killing a child. But when the embryo, when the fetus, when the baby is reduced to that, a tissue, an embryo, or a fetus, it becomes more acceptable, right? No, because the womb was designed by God to be a place of nurture and protection. Because David continues on to say, your eyes saw my unformed body. Sabi nga nila, if there is a window inside the womb and we would be able to see spot on what is happening inside the womb, well, today nakikita na with ultrasound, 3D, 4D shots being taken, the camera being able to see our babies. If we will be able to only monitor a pregnant woman, I am sure that we will not say that it is just a tissue. Because David said that, your eyes saw my unformed body. Because God is slowly forming that body. Because God personally fashions that baby inside the womb. He designed it and He created it and make it slowly into the human being that we are now. And David further says, all the days are ordained for me, were written in your book even before one of them came to be. Maybe David was on his back, watching over the skies, seeing his creation, and then he would imagine, I was just a shepherd boy. And then I became king. Up until now, you have ordained that. You have planned my life. Each human being's life has already been ordained by God. Every day of our lives has already been written by God. And now 55 million lives have now been stopped because man's value is based on the God standard. It is not my right because it is not mine. The value of every man is set on the standard that God has given. We are the only creatures. We are the only beings. We are the only ones created in the image of God. And that is what our value is. Our value is the value that God has set. So God created mankind in His own image, and in the image of God He created them. Male and female, He created them. Anybody of us familiar with the gold standard? The gold standard is the means by which each country will be able to print the amount of money that they have, which is based on the amount of gold reserves that they have. So the standard of richness, if you're a first world country or a second world country or a country that anyone will deal with, is based on the gold standard. So the richer you are, people all the more would be able to trade with you. So how good you are as a country or not is set by that standard, the gold standard. The value of each human being is set on the God standard. God made you. God made you. God made you. And David said, we are beautifully, wonderfully created. So what do? Know your worth. Because how you value yourself is how you'll value others. If you're able to see that standard that God has given, then you will be able to look at each other and say, you're beautiful. Can you look at each other and say, you're beautiful? Why? Because that's the standard that God has set for us, right? Pero totoo, a lot of us were not satisfied with the way we look, right? But David in his psalm said, we are fearfully and wonderfully made.